This morning's reading is from Proverbs 3, verses 5 to 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Amen.
Can we get it so it doesn't say slide 2 underneath it? It doesn't on this one. Oh, it doesn't? Oh, that's all right then. Oh, it actually does it for me. Oh, that's handy. No, leave it on. It's handy, that. Yeah, oh, that's handy. Yeah, I can start numbering my slides and won't get confused then. Now, around about 20 years ago, I went to preach in America for the first time. It wasn't that grand. It was just kind of, it was a church in Alabama, probably about similar size to us, and it was one of those kind of full of rednecks. And I'd say, hey, yeah, welcome there. I don't care what you say, it's your accent. I love your accent. But the other one was in Florida, which is a rather nice place to preach. It was like near West Palm Beach, very nice, place called Jupiter, like on another planet, really. And of course, when we were there, we had to pop over to Disneyland. When I say pop over, it was about 5 hours drive or something, but our youngest son was with us. The oldest had just got married, but the youngest came with us, so we thought we'd better take him, Florida, Disney World, and Universal Studios. There's loads to do there. And at Universal, Island of Adventure, there's a ride called the Hulk. Anyone ever been on that? Are you going to go on that ride when you go there? Yeah, what do you reckon on it? You liked it? You liked it? Oh, it's terrifying because it's like incredibly, they just bolt you out. There's no kind of slow start. It's just, vroom, and then you, and then, well, this is what I looked at the end of it. But you know what it's like when you're on those rides? What's the thing that you do when you feel like endangered, when you're upside down? You just cling on, don't you? That's why they call it white knuckle rides. You just hold on as tight as you can. Actually, it doesn't make any difference. The really brave people, you see pictures of them lifting their hands up, because they realise they're not in control and they're theoretically they're quite safe locked in that thing and everything's all right. But me, it just gave me that sense of slightly being in control. And it actually reminds me, actually, of some times in my life. When we moved to Chesterfield, that was about 20 years ago. I think it was the same year we went to, we ran about 20 years ago. Anyway, we moved to Chesterfield. But it was a bit complicated because I was in Portsmouth, and we lived in a church house in Portsmouth, but we had a house in Southend that we were selling, and we were buying a house in Chesterfield. We'd been letting our house in Southend out, and we discovered that the tenants had kindly sort of knocked a hole in the wall and put a door in without getting planning permission, or I think it's building regs, checking the building regs out. And of course, as soon as we tried to sell it, everything went belly up, and we had to try and sort of get all this done retrospectively, and it was really complicated. But I find that sort of thing really stressful. So, we didn't know where we were going to live. We didn't know what was going to happen about selling our house. We knew we liked the house we lived in, but it wasn't ours, and we couldn't transport it to Chesterfield. And I remember going to see someone once saying, I just want everything to be in control again. It was that feeling that life was totally out of control. And let's be honest, none of us like to feel out of control. We all like to be in control, and maybe you've even been called a bit of a control freak. I think I probably have. I think I probably am sometimes. We all like to hold on to what's going on in our lives and families. We're all troubled by what's going on in the world, which makes us want to control our world around us even more. And of course, on social media, there is so much misinformation, and with what they call artificial intelligence, so you don't know what to believe and what's going on. So that makes you try and hold tight to what you know even more. It's like those white knuckle rides. We try to control anything and everything. And the problem is, the more we control, the more we're afraid of losing control. And the more we're afraid of losing control, the more we control. And then there's this vicious cycle, and in the end, we become control freaks. We control the people around us. We control our circumstances. And actually that ruins our relationships and dominates our lives and affects our relationship with God if we're people of faith. Now, we're in week 5 of You'll Be Glad You Did. And in this series, we've been looking at how we can apply God's wisdom to our lives, God's wisdom, not mine, so that when we look back on what we did in practical things, we'll be glad that we did things a certain way. And this morning, we're going to think about how to stop being a control freak. Now, what you do with this depends on where you are in your journey of faith. Now, you may not be a person of faith. You may come to the coffee shop, or you may have been brought here by a friend. And that's great. It's great to have you here. And, you're going to find a lot of really useful things here. So listen tight. Listen hard, because I hope you find this really helpful, because we all have that tendency to control. And it gets really harmful because we can't really control what goes on around us. But if you are a Jesus follower, actually, this is for you particularly because you need to do something. You need to have that answer to being a control freak, which is to choose surrender over control. And that's the ultimate antidote to being a control freak. Now, what I want to do is, to help us understand this, I want to give a contrast of 2 different people that we meet. This is in the older part of the Bible. There's an older part we call the Old Testament, the newer part we call the New Testament. And these are people who lived long ago but trusted God. But they weren't perfect, and sometimes, they messed up. And this guy did. His name was Abraham. Although at that point his name actually was Abram. He met with God and God changed his name to mark that, but he was known as Abram that day. But I'll probably still refer to him as Abraham, because you know what I'm like with names. But let me tell you something that happened in his life. God had met with him. And the basis of his relationship with God was faith. Abraham came before God gave all the laws. And actually, one of the Christian leaders, Paul, looks back on Abraham and he says, Abraham is the example to us because he trusted God. He had faith. He's an example. And God had promised him that he was going to have children, have a family, and he was going to have a great nation come from him. But the problem was that Abraham had no children. And actually in that culture, it's always difficult if you can't have children. But in that particular culture, it was a really big thing. There was that sense of shame that came on them, but also that they couldn't continue the family. And it seemed to clash with God's promise. God had promised him a son. God had promised his family a future that would affect the whole of the world. So Abraham believed God. And Sarah believed God for a time. But eventually they waited and waited and waited and waited and took matters into their own hands. And this is what happened. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abraham, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with the slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abraham agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar. She conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Now, that is quite something. The Bible's not a tame book, And actually, you look at that. First time I read that, I thought, wow, it's like watching a scene from EastEnders, really, when you watch that, isn't it? Some really shocking, complicated things. But what you need to understand is actually, in that culture, it was the done thing. You see, if you couldn't have a family, it was really important that you continued the family line. If there was no heir to the family, then the husband had a right to go and sleep with the slave and produce an heir through them. And so if they were able to bear the children. So it was an accepted thing to do. So it wasn't such a shock because, Abraham and Sarah were people of their time, accepted, but was it the right thing to do? Well, of course it wasn't. God had made his promise to them. God was going to keep his promise, but he was going to do it in his time and not theirs. And the problem is that Abraham and Sarai grew impatient. They thought they knew better from God. They seized control, took matters into their own hands, and it ended in tears. If you read on, you'll see, Ishmael had tension with Isaac, and also, Ishmael's mother had tension with Sarai. She was driven out, but God promised to protect Ishmael and the family that would come from him. And then there was tension all along between Ishmael's descendants and Abraham's descendants. It goes right through the Old Testament. And people say, actually, it affects us today, but I won't go into that. But I wonder if you have a similar experience. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think you've done something in the script of EastEnders and anything like that, produced an heir in that way. But maybe you've taken matters into your own hands because you've got fed up with waiting. It's like that. Do you remember that poster about the two vultures? They're sitting there and the one vulture says to the other, "Patience, my foot. I'm going to go and kill something." But you're a bit like that. You just want to get on with it, and you're going to take matters into your own hand. And you think you know better than God. I'm not going to wait for God anymore. I'm going to go and do it. And so you settled for the person you knew wasn't God's best for you, but you couldn't bear the thought of being alone. Or you've made financial decisions you knew weren't wise, but it gave you a sense of control because God was taking too long, and it's got you into debt and all sorts of problems. Or a relationship that you've had has turned progressively sour because you couldn't control the person. Now, recognizing that as the first step, and I don't need to think, oh, what a mess I've made of my life. The first step is to recognize it and say, God, I realize what I've done. Help me make the best of this situation, and in the future, to let you take the driving seat, to let you be in control. And how do you do that? Well, I want to give you the example of someone else. Again, this person wasn't perfect. And he had to learn the difficult way, and his name was Job. And Job's a fascinating book in that older part of the Bible. And Job, we don't know much about Job. He was a wealthy man, we know he was a man who trusted God and was faithful to God. He didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. But there was this argument in heaven. Satan came to God and said, Job, you just let me get at him, he won't trust you anymore. And God allowed all sorts of suffering to come into Job's life. And the book actually is a collection of discussions between him and his friends. They were poring over that. His friends were saying, you must have done something wrong. There must be a reason. And Job was saying, no, I haven't done anything wrong. If I could just get before God and make my case before him and tell him, God, you've got this wrong. I'm okay. You shouldn't be sending this in my life. It'll be okay. I'm innocent, he says. I need to make my case to God. Now, he must have spent days and days and days and days in those debates because it goes on for chapters and chapters and chapters. It's not a quick read. You can't just read it just before your breakfast unless you have your breakfast like at 6 p.m. But part of all those speeches, I think, was trying to control the situation. Because when we don't know what's going on, we try and speculate, don't we, and work out, well, maybe it's this. Well, maybe it's that. Maybe this is going on. And none of us really know what's going on. That's the message there. That's what's happening. And there was a lot of toing and froing. And in the end, God appears. God makes his case known to him. And God said, Job, what do you know about these things? It's quite comical sometimes the way Job challenges him. Did you create the world, Job? Did you create the stars? Did you make the sun shine in the day? And he tells Job that the world is ordered and it's beautiful and good, but it's not perfect because we've messed our world up, because we've turned from God. The world is wild and dangerous. Nevertheless, God is still God and he knows what he's doing, and Job and his friends should trust him. And Job responds to it and he says, do you know what, God? I've been a bit of a chump. That's in the SJRV. The Simon J. Robinson version. Actually, this is what he says, and I love this verse. I often go back to it. I know that you can do all things. No plan of yours can be ruined. And this wasn't going to be part of the talk, but it was in my daily readings, and it just struck me when I was praying about things. You can do all things. No plan of yours can be ruined. It's up to you to do your will. It's up to me to surrender. You see, at the end of it all, Job chose surrender over control. And that's what matters. That's how we stop being control freaks. Now, we all have the tendency to want to control, all of us. No matter how relaxed, there's always some area of our life we want control of. But if you choose surrender over control, you'll be glad that you did. The first step is name what you're trying to control. Just stand back and write this down. When you get home, think about it. Who or what am I trying to control? My partner? Some other person I work with? a family member, my kids, my grown-up kids, my colleagues, my friends. You know, we all need to realize what we're controlling. We used to have a student, there's lots of students in the church I was at in Portsmouth because of the university nearby. And this lad, he was a lovely lad. He was a young man, I should say. Really nice young man. But he decided he wasn't going to go home at Christmas. So he came to us for Christmas dinner. We had a lovely time with him. And I found out why he didn't want to go home, because his mum wanted to know his every movement. You know, because his mum would ring me up saying, I'll change his name. I'll call him Fred. She said, "Where's Fred? Where's Fred? Is he with you?" Oh, he's gone home now. And then in the week, she'd ring me up and saying, "Oh, I'm just ringing up to find out what he's doing. Is he all right?" And yeah, she was controlling every part of his life. And actually, that made him distance himself from her. You know, we all do that, and we need to recognize who or what we're controlling. And what I want to do is give you 3 questions. As we come into land now, I'm going to give you 3 questions that will help you earth this, that will help you stop being a control freak, that will help you choose surrender over control. Firstly, is this worth my control? Usually it's not, is it? I mean, maybe you're trying to control your partner. You know, you want things done your way. There are things they do that you don't like. Now, I've been married for about 100 years now, I think. No, that's for 40 years. I can't remember not being married, you know. Well, I was not married at one point, but for most of my life, I think I've been married for the big chunk of it. You know, and I have to tell you, you know, I'm not always an easy person to live with, you know. That surprises you, does it? But over the years, you know, what we've learned is it's knowing what's really important and what's not important. You know, there are some things we have to do, we have to agree on, and some things actually, you know, we prefer. You know, Hazel would prefer. I asked her, you know, for examples. I can't think of anything that she does wrong, actually. So we did a Mr. and Mrs. once, and they said, "Can you think of any faults?" And I said, "Well, no, except she doesn't like yes. That's the only thing. Yeah, your music taste not so good, but that's the only thing." You know. But, you know, Hazel would love it if I bought less records, you know, because, I mean, when we had plastic bags from the record shop, she counted the bags, you know. There's 3 more Tall Bird record bags here. Well, now there's not plastic bags. I can get around that. But if they come in the post, what I do is I have to quickly put the packaging in the recycling so she doesn't count it. You know, she'd prefer I didn't buy so much records, but, you know, I think she said, "Well, I realise I can't control that. There's nothing I can do to control that. It's impossible." But ask yourself, whatever it is, you know, whether you want your spouse, you know, to put things in a certain order, you want them to do things your way, is it really worth it? Does it really matter? Does it respect them as a person? Or maybe it's something that happens around your home. You know, you live on your own and you're really protective of your house, and you don't like people standing on your lawn. You've got that sense of control, you know, control. I've seen this. I mean, there's a guy who used to live near my mum, and all you had to do was get near the lawn, and he'd be watching out. He spent all his day, what a sad man, watching out the window going, "Get off my lawn! Get off my lawn!" It's really sad. But, you know, we can be like that, can't we? You know? Yeah, because we want to control. You know, with me, it's cats. It's cats, you know. I mean, I used to love cats, but there's a gang of cats that follow me around and make my life difficult. And they come onto my lawn and do whoopsies and all sorts of things, you know. And I cannot control. I could spend my life watching out the window, go, "Psh, go away!" You know, I suppose I could put rat poison down for them, but that wouldn't be. No, sorry, cat lovers, I wouldn't do that, honest. But some things we can't control. Maybe it is, you know, that, and you've got to think, actually, does it really matter? You know, okay, I've got to go and dig up the cat's whoopsies and bury them, you know, or, okay, you know, they're doing that differently to me, but it doesn't matter. Am I really going to lose sleep about it? Maybe you're trying to control your kids. Now, of course, we need to guide our children. We need to make sure our children go in the right way, but sometimes, you know, as parents, we can actually try and control everything they do. You know, this little lad who was with us, and when he was there, I didn't even notice it, but his dad kept saying, "Albert," I'm just picking a name out at random, "Albert, stop slurping." I didn't interfere. I thought, "Oh, poor little lad, let him slurp. Does it really matter? Do you really need to control that? Does it really matter if your teenage boy or girl plays the music as loud as they do? I'll tell you what to do. Reverse psychology. Go out to the room and say, "Can you turn that a bit louder, please? I want to hear it some more." They'll love that, you know. I mean, does it really matter if your teenager leaves their room in an absolute mess? Does it matter? Just go in the room and say, that's a really tidy ceiling you've got there, isn't it? Just don't try and control those things. You see, the trouble is, if you're trying to control those little things, the important things get lost because they start backing away from you because they see you as a control freak. And when you want to tell them something really important about their relationships, about keeping themselves pure, about being wise with money, about choosing friends wisely, they'll just lump that all together with you being a control freak. Choose the issues. Maybe you're trying to control something at work. You've got a pet project and you hate anyone else being on that project because it's yours. Surrender that. God's given you that project, but God's given it to share with other people. And I want to be honest here, actually, looking back in ministry, and this is like about 10 years ago. As I said, I had a very difficult time about 10 years ago, and I spent about 2 years reflecting on how I do things differently. And do you know what I learned? One of the things I learned is actually not trying to control. I had a vision, and I still say it was a good vision, but the trouble is it was my vision, and blow you if you get in the way of my vision. And I controlled everything around that vision instead of saying, Lord, I surrender it to you. It's for you to enable that vision to get through. If it's your vision, it will succeed and people will be won to it. I've had to learn to hold on lightly. Now to balance that, what do I need to do? See, surrendering doesn't mean that we don't do anything with our life. There's some things that God wants us to do. It's up to you to go and find a job if you haven't got a job. It's up to you to get your finances organised or get some advice to get your finances organised. It's up to you to seek advice about decisions you have to make so that you make wise choices. There's some things that God does with us, but we surrender these things to you and say, Lord, help me do these things. So a man, he was telling me about his little boy was struggling with some kind of craft thing at school, and he was really troubled. And he said, shall we pray that Jesus will help you? And he said, yes, Dad. And he came home quite happy that afternoon, and he said, oh, did Jesus help you? He said, well, no, I had to do it myself, but it was all right, And he said, actually, that's how Jesus was helping you to do it. And then, thinking about Abraham and Sarai, are we trying to take matters to our own hands? When we try and control things that we can't, we get fed up waiting for God. And when we surrender to God, the result is peace. And when we try and, I can't control phones that come on. Yeah. You can't change your spouse, but God can. You can't control your kids' future, but God can. You can't heal your loved ones, but God can. Now, do you know what? I've been thinking about us as a church family and the place that we're at the moment, and this is really important for us at this time. Because we all know, we're concerned about the youth work. The young people, it's so important. And they're not the church of the future, they're the church of the present. They're part of our church here, and they are our future. And one of the things, as I said, the Lord's really challenged me is stop praying about the youth worker first, start praying for the young people and do it that way round because it's about them. And we're concerned about the staffing, and we're concerned we've had no response. And sometimes we have that sense of panic, don't we? We've got to do something. We've got to grab the first person that comes along. And, there's a real danger. We're in a really dangerous point that we could take matters into our own hands. Now, we need to investigate and explore and think and discuss and take advice and bring these things to the Lord. But we need to say, Lord, what do you want and what's your timing? Help us discern your will. As we're told in Galatians 5, since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. I was reading a really good book this week about leadership by a guy called Stephen Cottrell, who is the Archbishop of York and who came from Southend originally, I discovered. Funny thing is, my friend used to know because he went out with a friend of his who he knew from drama and used to have a Mohican haircut in those days. He's bald now, so every time you see him, think of him with a Mohican haircut. Imagine that when he spoke at the Queen's celebration. Anyway, rabbit hole, sorry. All right. But it was really interesting. He told a really interesting story because the book was actually about leadership, but I think the principle applies to all of us. Because what he was saying was that when we lead, we need to do it from that place of stillness before God. And actually that goes for everything we do in the Christian life. That goes with surrender. And he tells a story about a scout camp he was at. And I wonder if I was at that. I'm thinking now that, he's the same age as me, about 40. It was probably Belfairs, where he was at Belfairs Scout Camp. But he tells the story of a friend who was on a makeshift trampoline. And in those days, health and safety was pretty low on the agenda. And one of the scouts fell 20 feet. And he was pretty badly hurt. And they rallied around him. And then one of them ran to get the scoutmaster. Now, you'd imagine the scoutmaster would run towards him. But he wasn't. He was walking purposely, not walking slowly, but he was walking. He didn't run. And he came and he sorted out the situation. And anyway, the boy was okay. But later on, he asked the scoutmaster why he walked and not ran. Really interesting. He said, well, I'll tell you why. There's a reason. I needed that thinking time. While I was going from A to B, from where I was to where that boy was, I was thinking, what are the scenarios? What are the kind of things I need to be ready to do? The other thing was, if I ran, I would have been out of breath. And what if I needed to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? I wouldn't be able to do it. And because of that thinking, the boy was saved. And this is what he says. This is what Stephen Cottrell says. He says, sometimes, I know it's talking about leadership, but I think it applies to every area of life. Sometimes the best leadership requires stillness and composure, then the right decisions are taken. And actually, that's really important for this juncture as a church we are at, because actually, sometimes it can be like buses, all the possibilities come along. There's loads of things to sift through from the church meetings, loads of great ideas, but actually, sometimes a little bit of time of stillness and composure. God, what do you want? Where are you taking us? How can we make sure we do your will? Rather than getting impatient and seizing control of the situation. Well, whether you're a person of faith or not, we all need to realize that we're not in control. And remember the kind of things you're trying to control. You go back and name those things and say, I'm not going to control them anymore. And ask yourself, are they mine to control or mine to surrender? So if you're not a Jesus follower, what I want you to do is realize actually you're not in control of your life. You might have all the technology that gives you the appearance of control. You might be able to look at your phone right now and see who's knocking at your door, or change your heating now. But you are not in control of your life. None of us are, but God knows. God's in control, and we can surrender to him. And if you want to surrender to him, you might have a big yes to turn to Jesus and trust in him because he's died for your sins and rose again. Or a little yes, maybe I want to find out more about this. I want to go on the Alpha course to learn more. And you'll be glad that you did. And if you are a Jesus follower, well, surrender to God. Choose surrender over control, and you'll be glad that you did. And next week we're going to finish with Colin telling us about how to live generously.